Welcome to Entrepreneurs Conquering the World, how to build a global audience and profit from it. With your host, Carmen Ring.
Hello everyone, welcome to our show, Entrepreneurs Conquering the World. My name is Carmen Ring, I'm your host, and today I have with me George Simons. Welcome, George.
Welcome's a great thing to hear from New York. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. George is a consultant, trainer, and coach in over 50 countries. Originally, he's from US, and he now lives in France. He's an international author and the manager of a large LinkedIn group on cultural competence. George, through his company, George Simons International, has also developed a tool. It's called Diversify, and it's actually a game meant to teach people how to do business internationally. And I'm very excited to hear more about that. Once again, George, welcome. Tell us more about you, your background, and how you got here.
Thank you, Carmen. We were playing with my name before we went online, and actually, I'm a phony. I'm not George Simons. I'm George Simonovich. And I'm very much working with migrants these days and creating games to acculturate them to the environments in which they're coming. And this is not easy because I got the name George Simons because my grandfather, being an immigrant to the USA at a time when immigrants weren't very welcome, or maybe they're not that much even today, his name was Simonovich. But he got tired of being called Simonovich, the son of a bitch. So he changed the name to Simons.
That's a very funny story nowadays. I bet back then it wasn't that funny, but now it is.
Well, you know, we're not very sensitive to culture, and we're not very respectful, and many times. In the days of my grandfather's immigration, things would happen like a Polish guy would show up, and his name is Valentinowicz, and the guy at the customs and the immigration would look at him and try to write, and he'd say, "Your name is Walters." Okay, so a lot of people were renamed right at the moment they got off the boat at Ellis Island in the USA. And I'm kidding about this because it's past history for me, but it's real painful stuff for a lot of people in the world today. So in addition to my business of creating games and using them for training functions and creating various kinds of intercultural training for my clients, I'm very concerned about the impact of culture on our world and the challenges that we face in a very desperate, very wartime time. So that's been a preoccupation and a passion of mine at the moment, seeing how we can learn to use all of these tools that we've created to do business better together, to communicate better together, to actually make this a better place to live for a lot of folks.
And what are some of the aspects you approach in your games? Like, on what aspects exactly do people who use your games learn to do business? What are some of the factors we have to take into consideration when doing business internationally?
Well, basically, I can explain for a moment what the games are like. They're a set of cards that people draw and play, a bit like Trivial Pursuit. Mm-hmm. Well, they draw a card and they respond to the card. So what we're trying to teach people is, number one, we call it SMARTS, facts about the culture that you're dealing with. That's a starting point for knowing the culture. Then we have a series of cards which are called Choice, and they ask how to behave in certain situations. And then we have cards that we call guide cards, and these are wisdom from and about the culture, both from people inside the culture and from people who know the culture well, outsiders who've experienced it. Sometimes they're proverbs and wisdom from the culture itself. Then we have risk cards, which are the fun ones. These are things that happen to you when you're in the culture. Sometimes they're a pleasant surprise, they're a plus, and sometimes they're a very nasty surprise and they're a negative. You've made a mistake or you didn't know something, and here's the consequence that happened to you. And finally, we have some cards that show how people do say things in a certain culture. And then they ask, how do you do that same thing in your culture? For example, giving feedback. Some cultures give feedback very, very forcefully and directly, and it's understood, no problem. On the other hand, giving feedback in public can be very, very painful. I remember one of my first jobs many years ago was consulting with a shipping company. And it was a shipping company with very direct Scandinavian management, but the seamen, the sailors, the workers on the boats were largely from the Philippines and from Latin America. And one of the things that happened was one of the officers took his cabin boy by the ear, embarrassed him in public for something he did. And funny thing, that officer disappeared overboard that night. So this is cultural awareness in some situations can be a matter of life and death, not just did we get the contract or did we not get the contract in a business negotiation. So there are very, very serious things involved in culture, and it's becoming increasingly difficult because, as you know, people are very mixed these days. We have a new phrase in the intercultural business, which is called the TCK, the third culture kid. Okay? This is somebody who's been born to a family that maybe has lived as expatriates in 3 different countries in the years of their childhood and their growing up. So they may have learned one culture that's different from the culture they find themselves in, but more than likely they picked up pieces and bits of different cultures. And then the question is, when do these come into play? When are they appropriate? And is this a paradigm for the kind of culture most of us are going to experience in the future? I mean, I'm an old guy now, but many years ago when I was a kid, I was living in a family that was part Polish, part Austrian, and relatives from Italy and other kinds of countries. So I had all kinds of pieces in the immigrant family set up in the United States. But today, young people are not immigrants at all. They're just being carried from one place to another, and suddenly, you know, they're quite multicultural, and how they behave depends on the context in which they find themselves.
And would you say that the fact, in your case, the fact that you come from like you said, different backgrounds and immigrants, and you yourself as an adult, you have lived in multiple countries, would you say that had an impact in you choosing the career you're on and the path you're on right now? Because you've been faced with all these challenges in between cultures, did you feel like a mission, like a need to teach others how to overcome them just because you knew about them already?
Well, that's a very good question, because it's like second nature to me in a sense. My father was a man of great curiosity and interest, and he'd go fishing every weekend and take me with him. And on the way home, he'd take me to a different restaurant, Chinese restaurant, Polish restaurant, Russian restaurant, Hungarian restaurant, and so on. So I never thought it was strange that there were many cultures around me. And, these were the kind of neighborhoods we lived in the big city when I was there. How I really got started, though, was a little bit different. And that is, in the beginnings of the 1960s, we had great race problems, as if we don't today, of course, but race problems in the U.S., and there was lots of violence out on the streets. The military was out in my city. And at that point, I and a number of graduate students adopted a strategy which was created by the National Association for Colored People, NAACP, and that was that you took a family, maybe a black family, and took them to an Italian family, and they spent an evening together, and then the next week the Italian family would go to the black family, and so on. So my original mission around this was helping people to understand each other and reduce the amount of violence. And I guess that hasn't changed. I mean, this is what I'm seeing in the migrant situation these days and so on. So my choice of career was partly that. I also loved languages. And so early on in my working career, I found myself working with a consultant who was working in different countries, and I went along almost as an interpreter for these business meetings and so on. And suddenly it just all came together in terms of learning how to train people for negotiation and influence skills in different cultures, and I've been at it ever since. So.
And you started in the U.S., correct? Your business.
Yes, I would say so. Although basically I was on the road most of the time. For example, I was a guest lecturer at Management Center Europe for about 27 years, on and off. I would be going there. Another cultural immersion that I had was that I was a hippie in Schleswig-Holstein in Germany for a couple of years, and that was an interesting experience. And it's interesting because at that point I would have to shave every so often and go to Brussels to meet with all these business people, put on my tie, then come back home and be a hippie again.
So you've been international pretty much from the beginning, and that was also thanks to your background, which was a big asset in your case.
Yeah, I would say that probably I haven't counted it up, but I've lived at least half my life abroad. I've been here in France for 20 years now, and before that I was in the Netherlands and then in Germany, as I mentioned. So, yeah, I've been around.
We have a bit of a similar background. I lived in France also. I went to college in France, and then I actually lived in the Netherlands for a while. I was working, one of my first jobs was in the Netherlands. So we're a bit similar in that sense. It's just that I haven't been in France for 20-something years, because I've only been on this planet for 20-something years.
Oh, il faut revenir, madame.
Well, let me ask you something. Your games and your books, and mostly your games, because this is what we've been speaking about, they are translated in multiple languages. Am I right?
We have translated them according to the needs of clients, or sometimes we've had somebody who's been very interested in training with the game and they want it in their own language. So we have games now in English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Polish. We have our first game in Chinese this year. So we continue to do that, but it's usually a client will come along and say, oh my goodness, this happened recently. We've just created a business cooperation with a company in South Korea, and we don't know much about South Korean culture. You have a game on South Korean culture, but hey, we're in Barcelona, so can we have a Spanish translation? So we hooked up a good translator, and of course now we have the game available in Spanish as well. So it's often on just-in-time kind of business. And I say that it's a just-in-time kind of business not only because we often have to provide things almost, tomorrow or yesterday, as they sometimes say. We have to provide things very quickly, but also we try to keep the game's information and the stuff that people are interacting with as current as possible. So we try to review the games regularly to make sure, and then we only print them on demand.
And I was going to ask you, these games you're using, can they be used by anyone, or is just a tool that you use in your own trainings and with the people that are trained and coached by you? Or can anybody just buy them on Amazon or somewhere and just use them in their own company without you?
Oh, well, they buy them from us through Shopify, but there is a facilitator guide. So if somebody is relatively comfortable with facilitating or training, the guide will help them do that. And even if they're not, if they're just trying it, they can do it. It's nice to have somebody around who can be a bit of an expert to help debrief the game. But fundamentally, companies have bought the game and made it available to anybody who wants to play it. I use it in my own trainings almost always, but it's available, and anybody who wants to buy and use the game is most welcome to do so, and we do our best to coach them if they have questions and so on. And we try especially to get their feedback, their experience with it. So if we find something that needs some updating or something that's not there. You asked earlier about the structure of the game, and basically it's enables people to live and work better in the country or the place, the culture that they're going to work with. We have some also specialty games like the one I told you we're doing on immigration right now, but we have global teamwork, we have international communication, we have some games on gender and the specialized thematic areas that may be useful. One of the most valuable and best used of our games has been the series on healthcare, realizing that it works two ways. For example, I used to joke when I worked for a long time for a development bank in Manila, and people would ask me, they would say, well, what's Manila like? And I would say, well, it's just like Los Angeles. And they say, what do you mean it's just like Los Angeles? I said, well, the security guards are Filipinos and the nurses are Filipinos. Okay. Now, that's sort of put humorously, but the fact of the matter is, enormous numbers of nurses, both in Europe and the Middle East and in our environment in the U.S., come from there. I have a colleague who actually specializes, goes over there, and every month conducts a course for 30 or 40 Filipino nurses who are getting ready to go overseas. It's a market in itself. That's how many people are doing this sort of thing. So it's you know, obviously they need to know about the country they're working in. And if you go to a major New York City hospital or Los Angeles City hospital, you've got everybody there. You need to know about cultural preferences around health, who makes the health decisions in the family, what are people eating, is it going to be good for whatever we're treating them for, and so on. What are the specialties, what are the diets like? It's a wonderful book, for example, about done by a group of nurses about food and culture. It's a great book, and it's even got good recipes in it, the latest edition, so you can get a sense of how people deal with that.
That's wonderful. Maybe you can give us the title so if some of our audience wants to check it out.
It's Food and Culture is the title of it, but I wanted to give you the author's names if I could. But,
Food and Culture. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
culture.
Let me ask you one more thing that I thought was interesting about your business, because you know, most of businesses and, you know, they start locally and then they expand and they go internationally and then they reach another market and another market and another market. In your case, it was almost backwards. You started pretty much internationally because of your background and you're all over the place. And your product, your games have been adapted to local markets. I know your product has been adapted to local diversity. For example, in US and Canada, you know, big countries with different states and a lot of diversity within the country, your games have been adapted from internationally to local. How did that come about? Whose idea was it, or how did that come?
Well, I think what happens is that, you know, we'll do a game on a general cultural theme, and then as it gets used, we learn more about contextual and local differences and regional differences and so on. And we may start out with a very generic game, and then it breaks. For example, we had a game on Levantine Arabs, okay? And now with the immigrants, we're probably going to have specific games for Iraq and Saudi and so on and so forth, excuse me, the Gulf Arabs. So that's part of it. And in fact, what's been a useful thing for me is that I have been working on, I did a local thing. I had a consulting office in Santa Cruz, California for about 4 years. And then as the business of creating online stuff and the computer revolution that was taking place, and one day I said to my folks, everybody take your computers home. We're closing the office. We're going to be a virtual company. And this was in 1992. And that's how I got a lot of experience on virtual work, started doing cross-cultural virtual teamwork, for example. Part of the time that I was in the Netherlands, I was working for Shell in The Hague, in Rijswijk. And so that was sort of a catapult to the world. And just the amazing part of it is I'm pretty much an individual entrepreneur, but I have an enormous network. I'm the guy that everybody comes to and they say, hey, do you know anybody who can do a training in Kazakhstan next week? You know, something of that sort. There's lots of work to be done, but
you can be a wonderful resource for our audience. You know, if they are looking to take their business internationally, I'm sure you can help a lot with that. I'm not sure about the time and how much time you have, because I know you're very caught in your business is constantly growing. You just told me it's just growing constantly, and it's serving the whole world. It's a great tool that's serving. By the way, if somebody wants to check out your games, where should they go? Which website, or where can they see them?
It's Diversify.com. So DIVERS, like people who jump in the water, and OPHY, like the end of philosophy.com.
And it's on the screen, so our audience can check them out. Now,
I also have a personal site, a business site, but more focused on my other work. The Diversity is focused on the games, but I have GeorgeSimons.com as well, and the people can see that. So,
and that's about your business as a speaker and as an author and as a coach, right?
Yeah, there's lots of publications, and we're also on Facebook and LinkedIn and so on. You mentioned at the outset, I have been for many years a member of the various boards of the Society for Intercultural Education, Training and Research here in Europe, and I run their website with, we're getting close to 7,000 members. So I actually spend about an hour and a half of that every day in the wee hours of the morning, responding to people, connecting with people, and so on, and working with the posts that come in, particularly on the LinkedIn site. So very interested in what people's questions are, what their discoveries are, and particularly, you know, how we cope with the enormous changes that are going on now between the net and artificial intelligence and so on. I don't know, I'm an old guy, but I don't know what the world's going to be like in 20 years, but I'll leave it to you young folks.
And I wanted to ask you, now that you brought it up, this LinkedIn group. LinkedIn is a resource that's growing more and more every day, and they are developing, and I've seen they've improved their resources and their options, and LinkedIn, it's a fast growing tool, and a lot of people are using it now for business. Can you tell me more about how you build this group and how exactly it works? What kind of people are there, and how do you actually manage this LinkedIn group?
Wow. Well, first of all, this started at one of our CIETAR conventions, where a number of us were interested in creating a social network, but more and more interested in establishing for ourselves what are the possibilities and what are the needs for being an intercultural professional. So actually the title of our LinkedIn group is CIETAR Europa, Competence in Intercultural Professions. So the intercultural is a big word, and people come at it from all kinds of different directions. There are consultants and trainers, and there are media people, there are people in social services, there are academics, and so on. And no one's ever really defined what is this profession called interculturalist, because it's so diverse in its own right. So one of the ways that this serves is to bring together these various voices. And we have more people from more than 100 countries who have subscribed already. So it's an ongoing discussion about important shifts and directions in intercultural work. And you know, we've come. There are sort of trends, or what the Germans call Wende. turns in how we understand research and practice. And we're passing into what people now call an iconic turn, which means that you'll notice that we're exchanging a lot more images and fewer words. And so the skill at interpreting the impact culturally, meaningfully of images is the next big thing, or the big thing that's beginning to happen right now. So it's a constantly learning situation, and that's what I love about using the LinkedIn. And the other thing I do on LinkedIn is I write a poem every day.
Does it get published in your group?
Well, what happens is it's published in my own connections, and if it's really, really relevant to intercultural stuff, I will pop it over into some other groups. But fundamentally, and then once every season, I put out a whole book of them that people can download free of charge from Flipbooks.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And now, your group in LinkedIn, is that open to everyone, like say everyone who has an interest in learning more about intercultural or opening a business and they want to understand better the world, the globalization, can they just subscribe to your group? Is that an open group and anybody can join?
Well, you know, LinkedIn has open groups and restricted groups. We have kept ours a restricted group in the sense that you need to apply. We don't refuse anybody, but it gives us better contact and better information about who's in the group. Mm-hmm. If they apply, then we can automatically see where they're coming from and probably make it more useful. So we've had tremendous good luck with this group so far. I mean, I think I have only in 5 years now had to say no goodbye to one or two members who were spamming us with how you can get barre au chocolat, six-pack abs, as we say in the USA. This wasn't exactly what our interculturalists were online to learn. So, and this person just persisted in giving us Hershey bar abs ads. So.
And I think I actually think it's a great idea that you do this, and a great thing that you're doing this pre-screening, because that says a lot about the relationship that's built between the members of the group. You know, it gives a relationship and it gives a sense of trust, knowing that not anybody can just pop in and spam everyone, like you say. It's just that even if it's a basic pre-screening, I feel that says a lot about the community itself. And you said it's close to 7,000 members, which I think it's amazing, you know, having almost 7,000 people that do share a common interest for real. It's not just people popping in the group just so they can say I'm part of this group too. So it's really people that have something to share and that support each other. So congratulations for doing that. I think it's a great thing. So if somebody wants to join, feel free to check in, send an application. Do not spam about chocolate and abs. It's not the point of the group, but you can definitely learn some very useful resources about intercultural and apply them to your business or to your life the way you see fit. Now,
exactly.
George also has a gift for our audience. I know that. You want to tell us about that a little bit?
Well, this past year, my best friend and I, we've been buddies and we've worked together, collaborated for close to 40 years now. We wrote a book which is, I suppose you can say it's intercultural in the sense that it's generational. And it's a book called 7 Ways to Lighten Your Life Before You Kick the Bucket. So we both enjoyed the movie, The Bucket List, which I know a lot of people have seen.
That was a wonderful movie. Yeah.
Actors. Yeah. And we said, well, how do you get the most out of life as you're growing older? And so Walt and I actually spent a couple of years talking about it and getting together, and it's finally out in the beginning of this year and available on Amazon. It should be available on Kindle shortly. And I can make several copies available to people who might be interested in it, and just have them send me their email address so I can send them passwords to get a copy of the book, to read the book online in Flipbook. So it's we try to have a lot of fun with it, and it's everything in the list rhymes with bucket. Okay, just to give you an example, we talk about you've got all kinds of junk around your house. Okay, what do you do with that sort of stuff? It owns you. You don't own it often. For example, I have a collection of crocodiles that grew by accident around my house. Here's one that holds pencils. Everybody keeps giving me crocodiles. I won't tell the story of how it started, but it started by accident. So every time I have a visitor, they have to take a crocodile home with them. And this is part of my chuck it, getting rid of the extra stuff that's around. And then another one we have is called Pluck It. Rhymes with bucket. And Pluck It, those things you've been telling yourself, I got to do this someday. One of these days I'm going to pluck it. It's juicy fruit. Suck it. Okay? Good like that. And there are other rhymes, one that I won't mention, but is very important. Anyway, you have 7 of those different activities that should clear out your life as well as enrich your life and help you take to yourself the things that are precious to you. So anybody who wants...
What the audience has to do is send an email to diversity@gmail.com, as they can see on the screen, and get in touch with you for a copy or a sampler of this work you just mentioned.
Yeah, I'll send everybody a sample, but let's say that the first 5 will get the whole book, Link. How's that?
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for the generous offer. So the first 5 starting today, send an email, you get the whole book, and everybody else gets a sampler. George, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful having you here. Thank you for sharing your experience with our audience, and thank you for giving them a chance to stay in touch with you and to connect with you and learn even more from you. I know 30 minutes is not that much. We just got to get a little piece of you, but they can definitely have the chance to stay in touch with you later.
Thank you, Carmen, and good luck with all your projects here. This is great.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you.
To all my audience, I'll see you in the next episode. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for watching Entrepreneurs Conquering the World with your host, Carmen Ring.